Hello, welcome. We'll get started in just a moment here. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this data skills demo today. This is the second webinar that we are hosting alongside Neon. And before we get things started for today, I'm going to give a brief overview of Quasi if this is your first webinar you're attending, and set things up for today as folks are logging on. So my name is Julia Masterman. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the training coordinator for Quasi. Quasi is the consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic science incorporated. We're a nonprofit organization funded in part by the National Science Foundation, and our mission is to empower the water community in advanced science through collaboration, infrastructure, and education. Quasi sustains infrastructure to enable research and collaboration by hosting data repositories for water science data, specifically HydroShare. And by providing the support and infrastructure, Quasi hopes to help researchers formulate and execute their data management plans, be effective data stewards, and meet the requirements of funding agencies. Quasi also provides educational opportunities and infrastructure for student support. These often overlap with our data infrastructure systems, as we'll see today. These can include workshops, a summer institute for graduate students, webinar series and events like this one, a virtual university, and more. And with that, I'd encourage you to join our mailing list and to connect with us on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. But for today, this is, again, the second webinar in a two-part series. If you're interested, if you missed the first one, that recording is on the Quasi YouTube channel. But today's webinar is going to be a data skills demo exploring the water cycle at co-located terrestrial aquatic sites. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Quasi YouTube channel. We ask that you use the Q&A to submit questions. Also, if you run into any issues as we're going through the demo today, feel free to use the Q&A. This will allow others to upvote if they're having the same problem, and will notify us that something needs to be addressed. So please feel free to add questions at any time. There'll be devoted time throughout the demo to address some of these questions. You'll also be able to send chats directly to us, the panelists, speakers, hosts, via the chat infrastructure, but the Q&A is a good first stop. We expect that all involved with Quasi-Cyber seminars uphold the Quasi Code of Conduct and promote and maintain a professional, considerate, collaborative virtual environment. So thank you for being a part of that. And with that, a huge thank you to our speakers today. We're joined by Zach Nickerson and Nick Harrison from Neon, who will be leading this demo, as well as Abner Bogan, who's a research analyst at Quasi, to help answer any questions about Quasi or HydroShare infrastructure that we might encounter while navigating this demo. Later on, we'll be joined by Bridget Haas, who's a data scientist at Neon. But with that, let's get started, and I'll pass things on to Zach.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Okay, can you see my screen? Yep, thumbs up. Great. All right. Again, thanks, Julia, for the introduction. I'm Zach Nickerson. I'm an aquatic research scientist at Neon, focusing on biogeochemistry and hydrology. And I'm also heavily involved with the development of data science tools, code packages, and data skills resources, such as this one at Neon. I'll turn it over to Nick real quick to introduce himself, as he'll be part of this demo as well.
Hey, thanks, Zach. Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Harrison. I am a hydrologist and a geomorphologist with the NEON project. I've been on the project since about 2017, and I work on both our observational sampling side of the program, the aquatics program, as well as the instrumented side of the program.
Great. Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to be the main driver for the demo, and Nick is going to be the hydrology expert ready to field any questions or do any discussion you have about NEON's hydrologic data. And we at NEON are extremely grateful to Quasi for giving us this opportunity. And we're all thankful to you as well for joining today, either live here in the room or watching it online afterwards for walking through this demonstration of downloading, managing, and visualizing NEON hydrology data. So the demo itself today is going to be about an hour and 15 minutes, and it's going to be split into 3 sections. Between each section, there's going to be a short break to answer any questions or address any issues that you may be having with the code. Note that there is a spacious 30-minute chunk at the end to have a more extended Q&A and discussion, and that's going to be a great time to ask any questions about the content of the demo, other questions about neon hydrology or neon in general, and discuss how you can use neon data in your own work. We will have data product experts, myself, Nick, and Bridget here to answer questions across any of the major subsystems at Neon, which we'll go into in a little bit. And like Julia mentioned, please use the Q&A window to ask any questions throughout the demo. So for those joining live, you're invited to follow along with the demo as I go through it. This is not required, but it is a great option to get hands-on with Neon data while you have these experts in the room that can help you and discuss with you along the way. The code for the demo is available in R and Python and can be accessed in a couple of different ways. So I will be running the demo in Python using a Jupyter Notebook, but I can also answer any questions in R if you choose to follow along in R. The recommended method is to follow along using the same Jupyter Notebook that I'm using. And that Jupyter Notebook is available as a HydroShare resource. And so I'm going to move this window over here to show you this resource. And I believe a link to that resource is going to go into the chat. So here is the resource in HydroShare, and if you scroll down, there is a Jupyter Notebook that you can download and run on your own local machine. We do recommend that you try to download the Jupyter Notebook and run it on your local machine, but a fallback option is to launch this Jupyter Notebook within Quasi's Quasi Jupyter Hub. And so if you go to the top of this, you can access this resource in this notebook within Quasi Jupyter Hub, which is a cloud computing service. We don't recommend this as the first option because of the sheer number of participants in this webinar. It could overload the Quasi Jupyter Hub servers, but it is a great fallback if you are having trouble with the system or package requirements in your own local environment. I believe there are some Quasi representatives that are going to be putting some links about how to get started with Quasi Jupyter Hub, and they should be here to be able to answer any questions that you can put into the Q&A if you have any questions about using this resource within Quasi Jupyter Hub. The second option, which is the preferred option for our users, is to follow along in this Neon tutorial hosted on the Neon website. And there should be a link coming into the chat about that as well. This tutorial hosted on the Neon website has, as you go through it, code cells in both R and Python in this tabbed format. And so if you are using R, or even if you're using Python in a different IDE, you can copy and paste these code cells into your own environment and run along as I am coding along. So yeah, copy and paste in like RStudio or Spider, whatever you're using. Please note the requirements at the top of this tutorial, as well as the package requirements here, listing all the package requirements in R and Python. Now I'm going to be spending a few minutes going through a quick intro to Neon, and so that is a great time while you're listening to that to start getting your environment set up if you plan to code along during the demo. A note for Python users, please downgrade your version of Pandas to 2.3.3 if you're following along. That's due to a disparity in the Neon Utilities Python package currently. So for this demo, please downgrade your Pandas version to 2.3.3. So, like Julia said, this is the second installment of a series of Neon Introduction to Hydrology at Neon through Quasi. And we went a lot into detail about what Neon is in the first installment. And I highly encourage you to watch that YouTube video available on the Quasi YouTube channel if you were not able to attend live. But I'll quickly go back through kind of what is NEON. So NEON is a large facility of the United States National Science Foundation, funded through the Directorate of Biological Sciences and operated by Battelle. So NEON's Battelle staff, like myself and Nick, who work on the NEON project, we enable large-scale research through providing high-quality, interoperable data, samples, and infrastructure. NEON is a distributed observatory pointed at our planet that spans 20 ecoclimatic domains across the United States, from Alaska to Hawaii to Puerto Rico and everywhere in between. We have a total of 81 terrestrial and aquatic data sites at which over 180 data products are collected. All those data products are open and fair. And these data products are interoperable across an incredible spatial scale and planned for 30 years of continuously collected data. A significant strength of NEON's design is the use of multiple collection techniques, and then we call these our subsystems. So we have automated instruments, airborne remote sensing, and observational sampling. And across these systems, NEON collects standardized, co-located data that can be linked across space and time. The billions of data points that NEON collects are processed into over 180 publicly available data products that are formatted into researcher-friendly packages. We categorize these products into the 5 themes that you see here. And of course, in this demo, just like in our first installment, we're focusing on one of these themes, which is eco-hydrology. But due to the highly standardized nature of NEON's data products, the skills that you learn in this demo will allow you to download, manage, and interpret data products within the eco-hydrology theme, but also within the other themes and across all the themes. So focusing in on hydrology, NEON sites are designed to characterize the hydrology cycle of an ecosystem, specifically the ways in which water in its 3 phases moves through the atmosphere, soil, groundwater, and surface water. NEON ecohydrology data products can describe how water chemistry and isotopic structure change from a terrestrial to an aquatic gradient. They can also reveal how water availability or major hydrologic events can change the structure of an ecosystem, be it through biological change, like changes in dominant vegetation, through chemical change, like changes in nutrient transport, or even physical change, like changes in the morphology of a channel of a river or a stream. So these are all the NEON ecohydrology data products. Now, there's no need to strain your eyes or anything. I just wanted to show you the breadth of it and which subsystem they come from. So all of these data products come from these 3 subsystems. The ones that are highlighted in yellow come from our instrumented subsystem, which is sensors and sensor-based infrastructure. The ones highlighted in blue come from our airborne subsystem, which includes remote sensing and LiDAR platforms. And the ones highlighted in green come from our observational subsystem, which includes samples, empirical measurements, and surveys. So the first installment of our series dived in a lot deeper. Nick did a really good deep dive into all different data products from across the 3 subsystems. And this demo itself will introduce you to a number of these data products as well. So before we get into the demo, I just wanted to bring up some things that are coming up at NEON, things that the Quasi community may be interested in. So NEON hosts a monthly seminar series, and the one coming up in the next couple weeks is hydrology themed. And so we thought we would share a link to that in case anybody's interested in signing up for that. It's about the impacts of stream drying across biological and spatial scales. And that's going to be conducted by Dr. Dan Allen from Penn State University. So look for that link in the chat to register for that. NEON's also going to have a presence at the upcoming summer meetings in the aquatic sciences. So at the joint ASLO and SIL meeting and in the SFS meeting, NEON's going to have a presence not only giving posters and presentations, but also hosting workshops. So the one at ASLO is going to be about harmonizing distributed data sets in aquatic science, and the one at SFS is going to be about focusing on stream resilience, a hands-on data skills webinar similar to this one, but focusing across hydrology with different data types like biology, water quality, and sensor data. So look for those workshops if you're signing up for stuff at those meetings, and also just come and find us at our posters and our presentations and say hi and talk to us about neon and hydrology. So that will end the intro slides, and we will go into the demo. All right, can I get a confirmation that you can see my screen? The demo's up. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Thanks, Nick. Okay, so hopefully people have had some time to get their environment set up. Of course, chat the quasi representatives if you need any help on the technical side, and start adding stuff to the Q&A as you think of it. And like I said, we're going to have some pauses, and I'll call those out when we have pauses to discuss anything about the demo if you're following along. So this is an introduction to NEON's hydrologic data products across our observational, instrumented, and remote sensing subsystems. So here we're going to focus on downloading and exploring NEON hydrologic data products. And after you complete this activity, you'll be able to download and explore the contents of NEON data products, navigate to tools and data sources for more derived data products such as geospatial data, bundled eddy covariance data, as well as some of our airborne observation platform data. We're also going to discuss how to understand the similarities and linkages between different NEON data products. And finally, we will join and plot some hydrologic data sets from the instrumented subsystem across an aquatic terrestrial gradient at NEON co-located sites. So we already kind of covered the package requirements and installation. And so hopefully you're getting your environment set up, you're installing and importing all of your libraries. The first thing that we'll go over is about a NEON Data Portal API token. So currently, this is an optional feature of NEON data downloads. This is an interesting time because actually later this year, NEON tokens are going to be a required aspect of downloading and interacting with data from the NEON portal. So you can follow this tutorial here in this link to go and set up your own NEON Data Portal API. Like I said, it's not required for this demo, as it is still not required in general for data use, but it will be later this year. So in this tutorial, we are going to focus on a pair of co-located sites from NEON Domain 7, which is the Appalachian and Cumberland Plateau domain. And that spans kind of the Tennessee area, Virginia area of the United States. The two sites we're going to focus on one terrestrial and one aquatic site. The terrestrial site is called the Oak Ridge National Laboratory Site, or ORNL, and the aquatic site is the Walker Branch Site, WALK. The workflow that we go through in this demonstration can be done for a number of co-located sites across the observatory if they meet particular requirements. So for the aquatic site, it must have published discharge data and groundwater wells installed. For the terrestrial site, it must have published precipitation data. And the terrestrial and aquatic site must be within 10 kilometers of each other. So this is not an exhaustive list of all of the NEON co-located sites, but it is the list of the sites that meet this criteria. So obviously, we can't use lake sites because they don't have discharge. Some of our sites do not have groundwater wells, and some of our sites don't have towers and the streams within 10 kilometers of each other. But this list right here are all the sites that meet the criteria above. And so it could be fun on your own time. Maybe choose a site that's more near your study sites or an area of interest and try to swap out site IDs to look at these hydrologic relationships for any of these paired co-located sites. So in this tutorial, we're going to focus on one water year 24, which is October 1st, 23 through September 30th, 24. It'd be good to just look at 1 year of data. And all of this data has been published in NEON's most recent data release. And so it's all static with its own associated DOIs as you download. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to kind of walk through what it's like to download and explore NEON data products from the different subsystems. So first, we're going to do that for our instrumented subsystem. We're going to look at an IS data product, we call it. Then we'll go into some of the OS data products, the observational subsystem data products. Then we'll briefly go through how to download and use some of our more derived data products. So the instrumented data product that we will focus on here is going to be a precipitation data product. The precipitation data products are all published at NEON's terrestrial sites. And so for here, we are going to use the site code ORNL for the Oak Ridge National Laboratory site. And we are using here a NEON Utilities package. This package called NEON Utilities is available in both R and Python. And it's a great way, a great user-friendly way to interact with our API in a coding environment. And so while that's downloading, I wanted to take you to the data product landing page for precipitation. So this is on the NEON website on our data portal. Every data product has a data product landing page. And it goes through a lot of stuff, particularly what I want to focus on now, if you scroll down, is the availability chart. This will give users an idea of how NEON data is stored and why it's important to use a package like NEON Utilities to interact with our data. So our availability chart is split by site and month because is how we store our data. And so if you downloaded this data directly from this portal website, you would get a bunch of files that are split by site and month. And that can really add up if you're doing a lot of sites or months. What the NEON Utilities package does is it kind of does all the work for you. And so NEON Utilities and you can see by these logs here what it's doing. And so it will find the available files, it will download the files, and it will do all the unzipping and stacking for you and load those files into your environment in a more user-friendly way as data frames. So these are highly recommended using these files. Using this package. So it looks like we successfully downloaded our precipitation data product. And now we're going to kind of explore what the contents of this data product is. And this is an example of how most of the instrumented data products will look. So here we'll get the keys of the downloaded dictionary, which will tell us what kind of file types are here in this download. And as you can see, we have a lot of different file types here. And so what are these files and why are they useful? The most important files for a data user is probably the actual data tables themselves. So you see here, there's the TIP-PRE, which stands for tip bucket precipitation. There are two data files here. One is at a 1-minute resolution and one is at a 30-minute resolution. So it's essentially the same data at two different temporal resolutions. We're going to explore what this data table looks like here in a minute. There are two other data tables that are standard for any instrumented data product that give a little more details about the information contained in the geospatial data within the data files themselves. And so the first is a sensor position table, which reports all the geolocations of each sensor included in the download. This is going to be important if you plan to spatially link data products across space, which we're actually going to do later in this demo. The next one is a table that includes all of the information about any science review quality flags that are included in the download. And so for instrumented data products, um, they undergo what's called science review, where the scientists actually look at the data or run code on the data to see if there's any anomalies or anything that might warrant a flag in the data. And so when a NEON scientist says we want to flag the data, they will add this into a database and give a reason, a justification, a date range, and a flag value. And so this table gives the user the information as to why a particular period might be flagged. There are some metadata tables as well, including an issue log, which reports high-level issues across the observatory that could impact data quality at a site or across multiple sites. A variables file, which contains all of the definitions, units, and other important information for all of the columns in the data tables. There's a README, which is a high-level information about the data product itself. And then finally, there is a citation file, which is very important, a formatted citation and DOI for all of the data included in the download. So you get a lot when you download NEON data. So let's explore the data tables themselves. We're going to go ahead and explore the first few rows of the 30-minute resolution table and kind of see what a NEON data frame looks like. Here we have some site level information, which domain, which site it comes from, some of the spatial data, not necessarily geospatial data, but a relative spatial data, like where is this sensor horizontally and vertically on the eddy covariance flux tower. We also have date information for the time series data, as well as the meat and potatoes, which is the actual precipitation values itself. These precipitation values come with the real value, uncertainty, and a whole host of either algorithm-based quality flags, which are in our processing code, or like I mentioned earlier, the science review quality flag, which is here. So you not only get your precipitation data, but you get your uncertainty data as well as quality data along with the actual precipitation data itself. If you want to take a look at the variables file, very important for really interpreting what's in these data products. We can view that here. So it gives you essentially every column in a data table is turned into a row in this table. And so it gives you the data table name, the column, and then the important metadata for that field, including its description, data type, units, and some other helpful information. So really great additional metadata file to help you understand and interpret NEON data. So let's do the same thing, but let's focus on an observational data product. So for this data product, we're going to look at stable isotopes in surface water. This is a data product that's published at all of our aquatic data sites. And so we'll use the site code WALK to pull this data from the Walker site. So we'll run this, and then I want to go back and explore the data product landing page again to kind of show you what that contains more than just the availability chart that I showed you for precipitation. So we'll go through this a little bit slower. This is a great place to really learn about the data product itself. And so you get a description and an abstract, some information about the tables and their latency, more information about what's contained in the various data tables. Some things that are also included in the data downloads are posted right here on the landing page, including citation information, a brief design, a lot of documentation, which not only includes data product user guides or information on algorithms, but can also include other helpful information. So for instance, for this observational data product, it includes the methods used by our external labs, which can include not only the analytical method, but also the QA/QC that the lab does, and that kind of information, which can be very helpful if you're a user of this data. Really want to dive deep into the analytical results of the stable isotope analyses. After we get past the documentation, you see the issue log. This is also included in data downloads, but we also put it up on the landing page for users to view that as well. And then, just like in precipitation, we have an availability chart. All right, looks like we got our successful download. So now we'll go in here. We'll do the same thing that we did with the instrumented data product. But here, let's see what's similar and what's different between instrumented or observational data products. We see similar tables, including citation information, variables, issue log, and README. Those are standard across most all of NEON data products. We do observe that there is no science review flag or sensor positions because those are specific to the instrumented data products. We do see some new files that are not with the instrumented data, including categorical codes, which for observational data, there's a lot more flexibility in the types of fields that can be uploaded. So we have a lot less numeric or integer fields and a lot more kind of either freehand strings or constrained list of values that can be uploaded in this kind of a data. And so if there is a constrained list of values, all of those potential values and their definitions are included in this table. There's also a validations table. If any field requires validation before publication, we do let you know what those validation requirements are. And so that's a way for us to be open source, letting you know what our validation rules are for getting our data onto our data portal. Something else you'll notice is there's a lot more data tables in an observational data product. Really, in the instrumented system, you really just get the sensor outputs, and that is often one table, or maybe more if there's multiple resolutions. But here in an observational table, an observational data product, there could be a lot of tables. Like for a survey, there could be a lot of different tables about different aspects of the survey. For this sample-based data, you get a table for every point in the sample's lifetime. And so from the time that it's collected all the way through until the sample has been analyzed and returned. This is another way for us to be open source and transparent about what's going on with our samples from the time they're collected until the time they're returned by our external lab. So here we have a couple of different field tables. We have two different lab tables based on the sample types. And so we have H2O isotopes, which is hydrogen 2 and oxygen 18, as well as POM data, particular organic matter data, carbon 13 and nitrogen 15. For the hydrology focus, we'll focus on the H2O isotopes. We also get some lab QC data that they return, which helps us with making sure that our data is high quality. So let's take a look at the isotope data. This is data returned by the external lab. You can see, similar to the instrumented data, we have information about where it came from. Domain, site ID, the location from which it came from. We also have information about the date that it was collected and any sample information as well. And then as you scroll over, you see that you can actually see the outputs. So we have our isotopic ratios for D2H and D18O, as well as some expanded uncertainty values. So just like in the instrumented data, you're getting some metadata, which is going to be great for linking this with other data products across space and time. You're also getting like I said, the meat and potatoes, you're getting your isotope ratios, but you're also getting the uncertainty for those isotope ratios, which is a great way to assess quality of this data. Again, we can look at the variables file just like we did for the instrumented data. A great way to dive deeper and understand and interpret what's going on in this data product. So the two data products that I just showed you are level 1 data products. What that means is they go through some basic processing, they get some metadata associated with them, but it's essentially the most direct pipeline from raw data to published data. Neon does publish higher level data products. That could be data products that are interpolated across space or across time, or data products that have additional algorithms or theory or models applied to them to give higher order quantities. And so I just wanted to briefly go through these. Um, we're not going to dive as deep into these as we did for the other ones, but it is fun to show off these data products, especially in the hydrologic world, as you can assess more geospatial data here. You can look at higher derived water flux data, and you can also dive into our airborne observation platform data as well. The first one I'll talk about is the stream morphology map data product. This is a level 4 data product that gets post-processed and published on our Neon data portal. And the interesting thing about this data product is that it does download a bunch of tabular data, but you also get kind of an extended data package that's hosted in the cloud. And that data package has the file types that are more interesting for looking and viewing these maps and working with them in a geospatial way, because we can't publish that in a tabular form in the regular downloads. So that includes shapefiles, KMZ maps, PDF maps, stuff like that. So here we downloaded morphology data for our Walker site, because this is an aquatic data product. And here we wrote this code to very quickly spit out the link to that derived data package that I told you about. So if you click that, it gives you this link that will link you to a Google Cloud storage bucket, which will download this zip file. And when you view this zip file, you see this is where it contains all of the geospatial data. You see our shape files. Down here, you see PDF and KMZ maps. And so if we're able to click on this KMZ map, I hope this renders well in this shared screen environment, but really easy, fun way to load a map and get zoomed in straight to the Walker site. These morphology surveys are very, very detailed, and you get to see kind of what's going on across the entire 1 kilometer stretch of the stream. So it's a very fun way to view more derived Neon data. So the next one is our eddy covariance, or our net surface atmospheric exchange data. This is an example of a derived bundled data product, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. These code cells I'm actually not going to run in the live demo. They take a very long time to download. I do encourage you to run that in your own environment if you have time. But I will kind of explain the data that you'll see from this. And I'll do that by going to the landing page. So here in this bundled data product, what it means to be bundled is that it used to be a lot of separate data products that are now, because they're so similar and people wanted them downloaded together, we bundled them all together. And so here you have data products ranging from level 1 to level 4. The level 4 data products include things like temperature flux, momentum flux, CO2 flux, H2O flux, and footprint characteristics. And so this is a great data product to explore. And it's a little bit different how it interacts with Neon utilities, because you can't just run load by product with this data product, because the files are not tabular. They're stored as HDF5 files. And so there is a special function in here called stack eddy that you must use to view this data in a tabular format. So first you run a function called zips by product, which does some of the stuff that load by product does. It locates the files and downloads them, which is part of what load by product does. But then the stack eddy function will take those HDF files, stack them, convert them to a tabular format, and then puts them in a dictionary by site name. And so if you run these two cells above and then run this to print only the ORNL data, then you'll get to look at some of the flux data, which is very cool to see. The last thing I'll cover with no code cells is some of our higher level data products that come from the Airborne Observational Platform. These data products can be very large, and so we are not including any cells here to download those, but we are directly linking you to other tutorials and resources where you can get started with AOP data yourself. Some of the AOP data, including the canopy water indices, are directly related to ecohydrology, but there are a vast majority of LiDAR and remote sensing data offered through our AOP platform. And we'll have one of our remote sensing scientists here during the Q&A and discussion section to talk more about that if you're interested. So follow those links, explore some of that data, and be ready to ask some questions of Bridget, who will be joining us later if you have any questions about neon remote sensing or LiDAR. That brings us to our first stop point. So we're going to stop here before we dive into how to merge and interpret hydrology data together. And so this is going to be a great spot for us to field any questions, discuss any difficulties. If the quasi folks want to say anything that on their end, this will be a great time for that.
Thanks so much. No, it seems like no major fires have popped up yet.
That's
So
good to
if
hear.
folks are following along, it seems like most folks haven't encountered any issues, but please feel free to correct me, audience. Um, we do have a question about how how the data is actually being accessed. Um, Maybe if you wanted to speak a little bit more about the actual data pull from Neon using that block of code, that might be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So earlier I went into the Neon Utilities package, which we're running here in Python as an abbreviation NU. The way that Neon data is stored is in a site and month download package. So that file contains all the relevant information that we've covered, including the data files, the metadata files, and all that. Those are packaged by a site and a month and a data product. And what those are stored in the cloud. And what Neon Utilities does is it queries our API, which goes and retrieves those data files from the cloud and brings them into your environment. That's also when I was in the data product landing pages, you can download data directly from those web pages, and that does the same thing. That queries the API, which fetches the data packages from the cloud and downloads them to your local machine. You can also directly access the Neon API without using a package. There's a whole guide about accessing the API. We have library for the API, which I can maybe include some links later when I'm done with the demo.
Thanks. We also had a comment of someone who joined late, so I just reshared the demo resource in HydroShare and the tutorial on the Neon website. If you would like to follow along and run some of this code on your local machine, there's instructions to do that on that tutorial on the Neon website, as well as the demo resource in HydroShare. And if you'd like to use the Jupyter Hub, the cloud computing environment through HydroShare, instructions can be shared on how to do that as well. But you're also welcome to just listen, learn, and watch as we walk through this demo as well. So no pressure if you are joining late and want to just jump in where we are.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. I'll also say the reason that I asked people to downgrade pandas is because of this section right here with the surface atmosphere exchange data. If you did not downgrade pandas, you may have an error thrown at you in this section. And so if you're getting that error, try downgrading pandas and running this code again. it should fix that. And in the future, we will fix the Python Neon utilities package to make sure that you don't need any special package downgrades to run this. Okay, well, should I continue?
Yeah, let's keep on going. Thanks.
No other questions or anything?
None so far.
Okay. All right, so now we've had an opportunity to do some basic download and exploration. Now we're going to focus more on how these data products can be linked to each other. This is one great benefit of Neon, like I covered in the intro slides, is the standardization of all of our data products across space and time leads to more easy interpreting of the data products and also better interoperability between the data products. This exercise that we're going into is going to show how seemingly disparate data products like precipitation, which are collected from our towers, elevation of groundwater, which is collected from our groundwater wells, and continuous discharge, which is collected from surface water. Those are totally different parts of our observatory. We're going to show how those can easily be joined together, and we can actually interpret some hydrologic relationships once we join those together through space and time. So we're going to use three hydrologic data products, each from a different section of the water cycle at our co-located sites. These are all from the instrumented system, and so they are related in that way. Not to say you cannot easily join instrumented data to observational data or either of those subsystems to the AOP data. All that is possible as well. So what we'll first do is we need to download each product. We're going to re-download precipitation, then we'll download elevation of groundwater, which is an aquatic data product. Even though these groundwater wells, these shallow groundwater wells are in the riparian zone of our aquatic ecosystems, and so they're still considered part of the aquatic subsystem. And then finally, we're going to download our continuous discharge data product, which is an example of a derived level 4 data product because it goes through additional modeling. We model our continuous discharge through a Bayesian model. We first make a rating curve, and then we model continuous discharge, all using a Bayesian method. So the additional algorithms and models make it a higher derived data product, which makes it a level 4 data product. So we got our three data products downloaded, which is great. Now we're going to identify how these data products can be related across space and time. The fact that these are all from the instrumented subsystem makes this a little bit easier, but the concepts here remain true no matter what subsystem you're using. So temporal relationships is pretty easy. All three of these tables have the exact same column headers for start date time and end date time. Makes it very easy for joining. These columns, you can look in the variables file yourself. These columns all exist in these data products. They're all published in the exact same date time format as well. All of them are published year, month, day, hour, minute, seconds, and they're all published in UTC time zone. Great for temporal interoperability. These three particular data products are all published at a similar temporal frequency. So the precipitation and groundwater elevation data products are each published at a 30-minute resolution. And the discharge data product is published at a 15-minute resolution, which includes every 30-minute mark. So therefore, if we merge these three tables by one of the date time columns, we'll capture that every 30-minute value in all three tables. Makes them very easily temporally related. For the spatial relationships, for this pair of co-located sites, the precipitation and discharge data products are only collected and published at one location. The precipitation, in this instance, the method is via a tipping bucket those are all located on the eddy covariance flux towers. And that's the horizontal location. In that data table, you'll also have published a vertical location, which tells you either how far up or far down that gauge or tip bucket is located on the tower vertically. The discharge location is published at the same location as the discharge cross section. And so where they take our empirical measurements is also where our staff gauge is located, is also where we do a cross-section survey, is also where our pressure sensor is that gets derived to continuous discharge. So all of that being spatially located produces this one location for our level 4 discharge data product. The groundwater elevation data product is actually published at multiple locations. Sites can have up to, I think, 8 groundwater wells. This particular site has more wells, but the number of well locations published in the elevation of groundwater data product for water year 2024, there are 3 distinct locations for those. So that means that we should probably try to spatially locate the groundwater well that is closest to our discharge location. And a table that we talked about earlier actually makes this pretty easy. So earlier when we were looking at our data downloads, I mentioned the sensor positions table included in the instrumented data downloads. This table, published in both the groundwater data product and the continuous discharge data product, makes it pretty easy for us to find out which groundwater well is closest to our discharge location. So these next few code chunks will do that determination for us. We're going to use a package in Python called GeoPy. I think the package in R is called Geosphere, which will kind of do this distance calculation for us. So if we run the first cell, we'll get all of the distances from each well to our discharge location. The next cell will choose the one that is closest to the discharge location using this IDX min. And now the way we actually link them is not by the geospatial data themselves that's contained in the sensor positions table, but more of this relative spatial data called the horizontal or HOR position. So the HOR position is published in both of these tables like we saw earlier. And so what we're going to do in this next code chunk is we're going to subset the elevation of groundwater data frame to contain only the horizontal position that we determined earlier is closest to the discharge position. So those are linked because the sensor positions table contains that HOR value on top of the coordinates of where that position is. And so that's how you can map the sensor positions to the actual data tables themselves. So we'll run that. Now we have a subsetted elevation of groundwater data frame down to only one horizontal position, the one that's closest to discharge. Now we only have one spatial position for each of our 3 data products. So this code chunk down here is a simple merge of all of those tables into a single data frame. And this essentially is the completion of our temporal and spatial joining of all 3 of these data streams. So that was a bit shorter of a chunk than our first one, but this is another good breakpoint. So I'll stop here to see if there are any more questions or issues with those who are following along live.
It seems that a few folks had following along with the R had some issues, but we've been able to troubleshoot those. Um, and no other questions. We can pause a moment. Folks, if you have any questions either about the technical aspect of the coding or more broadly about these data products, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Um, and
Sure,
thanks
I can.
for the feedback.
Yeah, I can stop for another few seconds and wait and see if anything comes in. If not, we will proceed to our final code chunk. All right, I'll keep going.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Julia. So we've walked through how to download and interact with our data products, how to join data products across space and time. Now we'll get into making some fun visuals to look at hydrologic relationships at these co-located sites. This is a great way to use NEON data, not just to look at a single time series itself, but use our standardized structure to look at multiple data products all within the same plotting field, which really helps view these relationships for this open access, publicly available data that anybody can use. So I'm going to keep driving during this time, but I will ask Nick to hop in when I create the plots, and Nick can show off some cool relationships and talk about how to interpret this. This will be the final part of the tutorial, and then we'll go into more of a discussion and Q&A, which we may have more than 30 minutes since we haven't had too many snafus yet, so that's great. So first, we're going to plot these merged time series or these merged data streams into a single time series plot. We're going to use the package that is available in both R and Python called Plotly. This is a great package for making interactive HTML plots that you can zoom in and scroll and turn traces on and off. And so if you have any troubles with this package, now is the time to kind of test that out and see, because it'll create a really great time series to look at all three of these data streams in a single plot. So here, this is kind of a longer code cell because it formats this particular plot for looking at these three data products all on their own axis, the ability to switch discharge between linear and log scale, and some formatting to make it more visually appealing, different colors and stuff. So that's why it's kind of long. But hopefully, if your libraries are installed and ready to go, you should just be able to click go. And if you are doing this in a Jupyter Lab or quasi-Jupyter Hub environment, you should see this HTML plot come up in your file viewing pane over here. If you're doing it more locally in your own IDE or something, I would check whatever your default working directory is right now. We don't render this plot in the actual notebook or in the script, but it does save to whatever your default working directory is. And so if you click that, maybe. Well,
You don't
I had
have
to
to hit
jinx
the
it.
trust HTML thing on the top there.
Oh,
Is that a
hey, there we go. Thank you, Nick. I was about to say I jinxed it by saying we haven't had any snafus, but okay, we are good.
nice?
So this is, like I said, if you haven't used Plotly before, I'll kind of just show off some basic functionality here. Like you can zoom along the x-axis, You can zoom along the y-axis. You can double click to go back out to the full viewing pane. You can scroll up and down on individual axes. And some of the formatting we put in here, sometimes it's nice to view discharge in log scale. Not necessarily for this site. It seems to be a little bit of a smaller range of discharge values in terms of order of magnitude, but you can also turn off traces. So yeah, some fun stuff to play with. I think Nick's going to go ahead and maybe ask me to mess around with stuff, zoom in, look at some cool relationships.
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Yeah, and I will second the plug for Plotly, everyone. If you look at a lot of data, a lot of time series data, like we do, it's really a game changer. It's a great package. So I would encourage you to try it out. But in terms of the plot that Zach is showing, let me move my screen over so I can see it too. Um, this is a time series plot of discharge shown in black, groundwater elevation that's shown, I believe, in red, and precipitation that's shown in blue. And that's plotted over the course of the single water year at the Walker site that Zach downloaded. And so this plot does a really nice job of showing just how interrelated each of these data products are to each other. Specifically, you can see if you zoom in a little on how increases in precipitation often lead to increases in discharge and groundwater elevation. And you can also see what a big role groundwater can play in terms of accounting for the total flow of the whole year. If you do zoom in on a specific event, you can also see if a lag may or may not exist between the rise in precipitation and the rise in discharge or groundwater. And that timing can reflect a lot of things. It can reflect certain site conditions like the dominant geology, the antecedent soil, water, moisture conditions, the presence of maybe a hydrophobic soil layer, the amount of canopy present, things like that. General processes that govern delivery and infiltration. So a large scale, big plot like this is great to get a quick look at your data. Sometimes I personally will use it to identify and maybe delineate specific storm events or periods of base flow. And you can assess their magnitude and how they relate to each other within the water year. Or maybe if you're doing multiple water years, you can look at things like how the magnitude changes across multiple years. Do you want to go to the next plot?
Yep,
Cool.
I will do that. So there, that plot is there for y'all to play with. We'll go back here. So if we scroll down past all this Plotly code, here we have some further exploration, just looking at two plots that are not plotted in Plotly, plotted in whatever your base or ggplot that you're using in either language, to look at some relationships between some of the data products. And so the first one we're going to do is looking at cumulative precipitation and discharge across the water year. And so this is split into two code cells. Let me try to fit all this on one view here. So the first code cell is doing the math. And so what we want to do is take this merged data frame that we have and make a couple of new fields that aren't just the, raw time series, but a cumulative of precipitation and a cumulative of discharge across the water year. So that's what the first part of this does. And the second part, if you plot just these cumulative curves, they look a little steppy in places and can aren't as pretty. And so what I wanted to do was create a smooth curve for these. And so we use this lowest function here to kind of smooth out that cumulative curve over time. So the first chunk does the math for us and creates the smooth line, which will be nicer to view. And then we'll show off the resulting plot. And this is how we're going to see what kind of relationships between precipitation and discharge exists across this single water year.
Nice. And that is the plot. You can see it. And so, like Zach said, it's really nice once you have all this data downloaded and joined, you can dive in even more into different analyses and look more closely at the relationships between some of these variables. Like Zach said, we're plotting here cumulative discharge and cumulative precipitation over time. And these are super interesting relationships to explore because you can see and you can use these numbers to estimate things like total runoff, which is a pretty popular metric when you're talking about hydrology at a given site. That's the volume of excess water that leaves a drainage area. And you can see how that number compares to the total precipitation in order to get an idea of, say, how much groundwater is contributing to flows at a particular water body. Um, to do that, we'd have to do some additional work here in terms of relating the discharge data to the catchment area and expressing these types of totals in the same units as the precipitation data. So that's a little slightly more complex hydrology level calculations, but we wanted to show you this simpler plot to give you an idea of what's possible, as you dive in.
Yeah.
And did the other plot render, or is that the next step?
No, that was the next thing I was going
Okay.
to explore. And so this last plot, no special math or anything needed here. We're just simply going to plot the relationship between groundwater elevation and discharge to kind of see if there's any correlation there.
Nice. And there it is. So yeah, like what Zach just said, this is groundwater elevation plotted against discharge. And what he has done, he's color coded each of the points to show where and when they occur on the hydrograph. Um, so that's pretty cool. And when we were looking at the first bigger time series plot and talking about, possible lags, it was pretty clear if you looked at it a little closely, and we only looked at it for like a couple of seconds. But it's pretty clear that there's not always going to be a linear relationship between groundwater and discharge. And we can see that here in this plot. This regression really does a nice job of highlighting the relationship between groundwater and surface water and how the water table can be oriented in different locations and at different times, right? Because you can see the relationship changes over time when we look at it at this larger scale. You can also see at the top that there's some hysteresis going on in this relationship. And that can be linked to a lot of different things. It can be linked to the expansion of the hyperrheic zone, bank storage, things like that. A lot of changes in this relationship are seasonally driven, particularly by periods of low flows or droughts. So you can use a plot like this, particularly one that highlights the timestamps of the data points, to go back and reference that first plot to with the larger time series to see where on the hydrograph these relationships occur, and then explore things like what kind of preconditions may have been present to influence them.
All right. Thanks, Nick. So that actually ends the demo. That was the last slide. And, since we didn't have any major snafus with the code along, we did wrap up quite a bit early. And so we have some more time for discussion and Q&A. I did have a few extra nuggets in case we have more time to kind of talk more about Neon and what Neon offers to its data users. So before we kind of open it up for discussion, I'll just say that, the relationships and stuff that we did here is really only scratching the surface of what you can do with Neon hydrology data. I think Nick would agree. And so, we are here, Nick and myself, and so many Neon scientists here to really enable you to do research with our data. This is a publicly funded observatory. Like this is your data to use, and we are the experts here to help you get the most out of it. So we can use this discussion time, but also know that Nick and I are available in email if you want to reach out to us, and we can drop our emails into the chat so you can have them.
And we've also got Bridget, who has joined us to field any AOP related questions. Thanks for logging on, Bridget.
Thanks. I was happy to answer any remote sensing related questions.
All right. Thanks so much. Should we get into the questions? We have a few questions coming in from the Q&A, but we can wait.
Um, let's go ahead and field some questions, and if there's a lull, I have a couple other slides I could show off. Is that an okay flow?
Sounds great. All right. The first one is from Roy Peterson, who has two general questions. Firstly, how to screen for available neon sites in a certain location, specifically Eastern Mountains or Montana, excuse me. And secondly, for Bridget, could you speak more to the LiDAR use?
Nick, would you mind covering that first question while
Yeah, that's a really good question on how, if there's a way to programmatically screen for a site. I mean, we have sites we have an aquatic site in Montana or near Montana in Yellowstone National Park, so I can just tell you that, off the top of my head. But I'm not sure there's a way, Zach, in the code to parse that out.
Well, there is a sites endpoint in our API that
Okay.
would give you the Latin long of all of our sites. And so I think that if you were able to access our API and run that query, you would be able to get that information. I can also put in the chat, like, it's a big continent and we do have 81 sites, but we don't have sites everywhere. Um, so I'll put a link in the chat.
Yeah, I can do that right now. That's what I was going to say. I could put a link from the
Well, I
website.
just put something in there that's the
Oh,
field
cool.
site map and info, and it has an interactive kind of uh, Google Maps or whatever that shows you where all of our sites are. That could be a
Yeah.
good way for you to get a quick visual about where our sites are distributed.
Thanks.
Yeah, and then maybe Bridget, do you want to talk a little bit more about general LiDAR use and how that is used?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what the question is here, but I can speak generally to Neon's LiDAR data and how it might be useful for hydrology. Okay. So yeah, we collect LiDAR data at all of the sites, as I think Zach probably spoke about in this webinar. And I think the main kind of application to hydrology is that we collect the entire watershed when we can over the areas. So not just where the plots are and where the sensors are and the tower, but a larger area, about 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers. And so with that data, we have these repeat occurrences of the watershed over time. And so I think that would be kind of the biggest perhaps application here. And then I think Zach has also mentioned we do produce some canopy water indices, which are not LiDAR related, but those could be kind of paired with the digital elevation and terrain models. And so yeah, with the LiDAR data products, we also produce higher level products, which are rasters, and those include the digital terrain model, which is basically just the surface stripped of all of the vegetation, and then the digital surface model, which is the bare ground plus the vegetation, and then you can subtract those two to get the canopy height model. So that could be of interest as well. So happy to, if you have any more specific questions, happy to talk or feel free to email me. But yeah, that's kind of just a high level overview.
Thanks. Appreciate it. All right. We have another question asking to speak more about accessing runoff data kind of broadly.
Yeah, I can handle that one. So we don't provide like the metric of runoff for each of our sites. I brought up runoff when we were looking at that cumulative, that graph that showed cumulative precipitation versus cumulative discharge, because that's kind of the way that you can start thinking about runoff. But like I said, you would have to do a little bit more work and conversions to the data to get to runoff. Like you would have to start thinking about discharge not in terms of liters per second, but you'd have to start thinking about it in terms of millimeters per day. And so there would be some more conversions and some more work to do there. And if you're interested in that type of analysis, shoot me an email, and we can talk more about runoff at our sites. But the simple answer is no, we don't provide like those totals as a download package. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, thanks. All right. From Sanjeev, do you use AWS or any other cloud services for data storage?
Yeah, we use Google Cloud Storage. We store our portal data in GCS buckets, those site month data product download packages that I mentioned early in the webinar. For our higher level data products, there are additional data packages like what we showed off with the stream morphology data product. We do store some geospatial data in GCS buckets as well, and those can actually be directly accessed by a data download like we did earlier in the demo. I believe Google Cloud Storage is the main or only cloud storage that we use, but maybe somebody else can speak to that.
I think we do use AWS as a backup, but that's more internally, so that data would not be available externally.
Thanks. Okay. Next from Joel. Firstly, thank you. The Jupyter notebooks y'all made was very useful. They're interested in channel geometry measurements alongside stream flow, and though they're not familiar with Neon, they were wondering if those sorts of measurements get saved or are hosted by Neon. Things like width, cross-sectional area, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the question. We do take measurements like that at our sites, and that's part of that stream morphology data product that Zach briefly brought up, kind of in the beginning, middle part of the talk. So that's a level 4 data product. And we have those types of metrics available. And exactly the examples that you gave are a couple of the examples of the metrics that we provide. So channel width, we also provide like the edge of water width along the survey. So our reaches are about a kilometer in length, give or take, across different sites. And we do a high resolution survey, a total station survey of those reaches. And we've done, up until the last year, we did them about every 5 years or so. And so we take measurements like the cross section, and then we can compute the cross-sectional area. We survey the whole Thalweg, so we get metrics like slope. We do habitat unit classifications, so we quantify the number of like riffle and run and pool habitats in the area. I could go, on and on, but that's all contained in that geomorphology, stream morphology data product. And so Zach mentioned that each data product has a landing page, and I can link that in the chat. So that does a really nice job of describing everything that data product contains. And again, same answer kind of as I gave the last one. If you want to learn more about that data product, or you have any questions about it, shoot me an email and I'm happy to talk more about it and how you can pair it with some of our other aquatic data products.
Thanks. Okay, back to a somewhat specific question. What is the spatial resolution of the AOP data?
Yeah, great question. So all the AOP data is available at 1 meter resolution, and the camera data, which is our red, green, blue camera imagery, is at 10 centimeter resolution. So very high resolution for the camera, and that's mostly used kind of as context for the spectral and LiDAR data products.
Thanks. All right, moving to soil moisture now. Are soil moisture sensors and soil temperature sensors installed at standardized depths across all study sites, or do the measurement depths vary depending on site-specific conditions?
Nick, do you think you'd
Yeah,
be able
yeah,
to take that one?
sorry. I was typing in the chat.
No worries.
Are soil moisture sensors and soil temperature sensors installed at standardized depths, or do the measurement depths vary? I believe they, I might have to get back to you on
Hmm.
that one. Um, if the depths are standardized or not. We have a soil scientist on our staff, Ed Ayers, and he would be able to answer that. I don't want to give the wrong answer, so I might have to punt that one and get back to you on that one in the chat. Sorry, that was a
Great,
bad answer, but I don't want to give false information.
very fair. Um, okay, another kind of broad question. Could you explain the logic behind the design of the terrestrial, aquatic, or other observational categories? I'm assuming on the website. For example, when I zoom into D12, I see many icons representing different observations, but I'm not sure whether they correspond with to the same watershed, nearby watersheds, or something else. And they also share this is from the Explore Field Sites webpage.
Yeah, so yeah, depending on what type of scale you're looking at on that map, um, an aquatic site may very well indeed be in a different watershed than than what we would consider a co-located terrestrial site. And that's why Zach, when we were setting this up and we wanted to do some comparisons between an aquatic and a terrestrial site, gave that condition that we wanted them to be within 10 kilometers of each other. So that map, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, and I can see it being a little tricky to understand exactly, I'm not sure if the watersheds, I'm pretty sure they are not actually delineated on that map. We do have a table on the webpage that gives the drainage area to each of our aquatic sites. So that gives you a little sense of, how big of a watershed it encapsulates. But I would not assume that, all of the co-located terrestrial and aquatic sites are actually in the same drainage.
Thanks. Okay, we have no more open questions. So if anyone has any other burning questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. But we're at a lull at the moment.
Yeah, I can show off a couple more things that is a rehash of some things covered in the first webinar, but just in case there's a different audience here, I think it'd be great to show this off. So let me reshare my screen, and that can give people time to type out some more questions about Neon data if you have them. Are you seeing a PowerPoint slide? Yeah, this is just one slide that I wanted to cover again because this is from our first webinar, but in addition to using Neon data, we also have the ability to grant access to our field sites, our staff, even our airborne observation platform to researchers on a cost recoverable basis. And so you can actually submit requests to Neon, not only to use the data that we have published, but to potentially use our staff to collect data for you in our sites, something maybe we don't publish, or something that you might want to collect that could be easily linked to other data products that we do publish. You can also put your own sensors into our sites. So you can add your own sensor to our towers and our terrestrial sites. You could add a sensor to our aquatic in situ infrastructure. And like I said earlier, you can also request your own flyovers. You can request a flyover to get LiDAR and remote sensing data at your own study site. You can request those flyovers at NEON sites during other times of the year when we don't normally fly. And so this is called the NEON Research Support Services. Um, very great way to get more out of NEON than just the publicly available data that we have. And so if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us about that as well. The other thing I wanted to show is another great way to access NEON data through quasi-HydroShare. So in preparation for our first webinar, we set up this resource, this collection of resources in HydroShare that is a great way to directly link a HydroShare user to hydrologic data products published by NEON at a site level. And so this is a collection here, and maybe somebody could drop this in the chat, or I can when I'm done sharing my screen. But this is actually a collection. And so when you scroll down past the abstract, you can see the spatial coverage here. Every single NEON site, each of our 81 sites, has a resource. And within that resource, it gives information and links specifically to the site. The keywords are actually the data product names that are available within the eco-hydrology theme. And so you can see for this Lower Hop Brook in NEON Domain 1, which is in Massachusetts, all of these hydrology data products are published within this site. Gives you a bit about the spatial data for the site. And then the contents is actually a subsetted version of the data product catalog, but subsetted in a way that you can see only the eco-hydrology data products. And that is available in a CSV format, which is very easily read. So it gives site code, some geospatial data, and then let's see here. How do I scroll over? Yeah, it's easier to read it when you use the code resources that I'll talk about. But if you download this and actually open it up in Excel or something, it's much easier to read. And this JSON can be used along with some coding resources that we provide. So if you go down to the README and say, click here for R and Python helper scripts, it takes you to a GitHub repository where there are exploration scripts in R and Python. And so when you go into these scripts, you can access the JSON from these resources and actually get yourself a subsetted data product catalog and start exploring the eco-hydrology data products like right here in your environment. And even at the end, it gives you an option to choose a data product of your choice and just immediately download it. And so it's a really easy way, low barrier of entry to start exploring a vast majority of NEON's eco-hydrology data. So those are the two things I wanted to show off. Maybe there's been more time for more Q&A. But if not, that's all we have.
You were so clear, we have no more questions.
Great.
And so, unless there are other questions coming in, we can wrap up a bit early here. But thank you to Zach and Nick for putting all of this together. This has been a really great series to work on, and we're glad to have those resources accessible through HydroShare as well. We're hoping that a whole new group of folks will be able to access this data. And with that, oh, we got a late breaking question. What is the height of the eddy covariance sensors?
I believe they vary along the tower. So the towers are of different lengths, and then each of those towers has different levels. So there's not like a standardized height, but multiple heights. And Bridget, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, that's accurate. So the towers have to be a certain level above the tallest vegetation in the area. So like our tallest towers are at our Wind River site in Washington State. And then we have different levels along the tower, and that the height of those towers is included in the data. So if you look at that data product, it should be in there. And we have tutorials around that as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. And as was mentioned, please feel free to reach out to any of us with any questions that you might encounter. And have a good rest of your week. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Julia. Thank you all.